Okay, this is a quick video on how to adjust your cam chain tensioner assembly on a Yamaha XS650. This bike is a 1981. Your cam chain tensioner assembly may be a little bit different, but they're kind of similar. So just make sure. Your cam chain tensioner assembly adjustment is step one in your normal adjustment process. You really need to do these in order. You got to do first your cam chain tensioner, then you want to go to your valve lash, then you want to go to your timing, and then you want to go to your carburetors. You don't want to skip these steps. They have to be done in order. If you do your valves and then go to your cam chain tensioner, there's a possibility that your valves can be off from not doing in the proper order. Okay, what I've done is I've unhooked my battery for safety purposes, and I've also removed my spark plugs from the engine. The reason I did this was to take off the compression. That way I can turn the engine over easier. You're going to need to turn your engine over to do this. You can either do this by taking off the stator rotor cover and turning it with a wrench counterclockwise, or you can use your Kickstarter. I prefer the Kickstarter. It's a little bit easier. It's a little bit more manageable. You can also turn it over and watch the pin protrusion at the same time, and you get a better swing of the engine. You can really see it working. So first what you want to do is you want to take off that big acorn nut, and you're going to use a 7/8 inch wrench. You're going to take off that big acorn nut. I've already loosened mine. So you take the acorn nut off. This is a good time to inspect the O-ring inside the nut to make sure it's still pliable, it's not torn, that it's still there, not missing. If it is, you may want to replace it. I know you can get these at Mike's XS. You can also get these at hardware stores. It's just an O-ring. Make sure you clean it up some. There's probably some dirt and grime in there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the engine over a couple times, and I'm going to watch for the pin protrusion. This is your assembly. This is the lock nut, which is already loosened. Here's where your acorn nut screws onto. This is a 10mm nut where you would do your adjustment in or out to tighten or loosen the pin, and your pin is at the very end here, and it's going to come in and out. So I'm going to see what it's doing right now. It's just moving, okay? Which is how I like it. Now, per manual, it says that you want that pin, when you're rotating the engine, to be flush with the outside shoulder. A lot of school of thoughts on this. I like to have it move just a little bit, so no more than a millimeter in or out. Just a tad bit of noticeable movement is what I like. A lot of other people like that as well. You don't want it too tight, and you don't want it too loose. If it's too tight, you're just putting way too much strain on the cam chain. And if it's too loose, you can actually jump a sprocket gear or sprocket tooth on your cam. So you want to make sure it's just going in or out just a little bit. If you do need to adjust it, which you might not, first thing you want to do is you want to take off this 27mm nut. Just loosen it. You don't need to kill it. You don't need to take it completely off. Just loosen it. Your next step will be to tighten or loosen this 10mm nut, depending on what you want to do. If it's not coming out enough, you want to tighten it in, and that will in turn expose more of the pin. If it's coming out too far, you might want to back this out to not have as much pin showing. Okay, it's pretty basic. So once you get it where you want it, make sure you're checking it. Mine's moving just where I like it. Your next step is you want to tighten up your big 27mm nut. You just want to snug it. You don't want to kill it. After you do this, you want to make sure you recheck. Okay, that's fine. You want to make sure you recheck it. Sometimes if you tighten it up, you might get too much, so you don't want to be just on the edge. You're going to have to kind of compensate for tightening that big nut. After you've done that, make sure you check everything. So your pin was good, your pin was okay, you've tightened up your lock nut, you cleaned up your O-ring and or replaced it if needed, gotten all the oil off of there, and then you want to put your acorn nut back on. It's pretty simple. Now with a 7/8 inch wrench, I'm just going to tighten this up. Like I said, you don't need to kill it, just make it nice and tight. I can't tell you enough how you have to do this in order. Cam chain tensioner, then the valves, then the timing, then go to your carbs. If you do these in order and correctly, and you're troubleshooting, it'll cut that time in half, guaranteed. If you don't do that, and you kind of jump around, you're going to be chasing your tail. You got to do these in order. It's something you should always do first before you start troubleshooting anything, especially with carburetors. These things can actually affect the carburetors a lot. So once you've got all that done and it's all cleaned up, you're ready to move on to your valves. All right.